Hey, welcome to Relatable, Relationships Unfiltered. Separation in a relationship is often viewed as a failure or a setback. But what if I told you that there's times when it is actually the best thing you can do for your relationship? Joining me today are Mike and Megan Bayen. They're here to share with us their story about how they went from a separation to a completely transformed relationship. This is Relatable, Relationships Unfiltered. Hey guys, welcome.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Happy to be here.
Yes, thank you for being here. Tell us a little bit about who you guys are, what you do, and a little bit about your story.
Yeah. Want me to?
Sure.
I mean, I guess like not your story quite yet. Let's just start with who you are and we'll go from there.
For sure. So my name is Megan, and Mike and I met, we met a long time ago in high school, actually. We went to high school together, but didn't really talk. And we started dating when we were in our 20s, and we have been married now for, 7+ years.
7 years.
And we'll talk about our little stint in between. But overall, 7 years, and we have just had such a journey in our relationships. We're both entrepreneurs, so that has added a whole other level of excitement and joy and struggle and frustration. And we'll talk about how that led to, a lot of our issues. And new twin parents. We just had twins a month ago as of recording this. So it's been
so exciting.
But yeah, I've been an actress and a performer, and now a content creator, as well as a online business coach. And Mike has had a plethora of different entrepreneurial adventures too.
Sure. Yeah. Main of which I had to take a business that, many of the mistakes that you make as an entrepreneur, and then mainly poker at the moment, but at the moment, not much other than just being a father, I guess.
Yeah, which is completely. And with two of them, I can't even imagine. When I reflect back on my son being a newborn and like how much that took to think two of them, God bless you guys. That is a lot.
Crazy. I actually was joking around the other day. I was like, if he had to take one of them to the doctor, just one, I'm like, oh, one? That feels so simple now. Like it's just perspective if we end up having
all
one.
relative.
You only know what you know. So every twin parent, if you've had two at first and you decide to have another one and you have one after, it's just
you're like walking apart.
But everyone who just said that if you had one before and then you have two, it's completely difficult.
So
I would imagine that. Yeah, that in reverse, probably not great. So good thing you guys have started this way. Very strategic.
Exactly.
Yes. So tell us, let's dig into your story. So you guys were together for how long, and prior to the separation, and then let's talk a bit about even how that decision was made.
Sure.
Yeah. Yes. I'm going to go
first.
So we got started. We met we started dating in 2012. I moved from LA back to New York. We're both from New York and live there now. And when we started dating, it was like pretty immediate. Like it was one of those, I think this is going to be my person. And a couple years later, we got engaged. A couple years later, we got married. But during that whole time, there were definitely underlying issues that, as a lot of people, I think, naively going into this huge thing of marriage, we were like, it'll just get better. It'll just get better with time. And we got a little bit of help. We got help from probably the wrong person, I would say. We were just kind of like trying to try anything, throwing spaghetti at the wall. And then we're like, you know what? It's fine. It'll just fix itself, essentially. And about 2 years into marriage is when we realized, okay, something has to change. Otherwise, we're going to get divorced and this isn't going to work. And it's really, we can see your perspective on it too, of course. But for me,
I can have a voice in a minute, Mike. Just relax.
I had like a breaking point, where I was just like, I cannot do this anymore. So either we get help and we seek professional help, which we did, or I'm done pretty much. And he was amazing and was like, no, let's do it. We have to, anything we need, which a lot of my girlfriends went through similar things and did not have the same reaction. And I just feel very lucky that, it takes two and we really work together. So that was kind of the timeline. So 2012, we met, we got married in 2016, and we separated January 2020, not knowing a pandemic was upon us. So that was really fun.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So even when you reflect on those first 4 years and, talking about that these maybe things were creeping up or things that you were aware of. What were some of those things? Like, if you don't mind getting vulnerable in that way. And how do you think that you guys, I guess, even kind of justified them? Because that's what we do, right? When we have this dissonance of like, this thing doesn't feel right, or this thing is not working for me. And then we find ways to justify it or put our heads in the sand or whatever the case, which then inevitably turns into what it turned into. So what were some of those experiences that you feel like you might have been looking past?
Sure. I mean, they were mainly intimacy driven. It was intimacy around alcohol. Alcohol, like many young people, I'm assuming, we grew up in New York City a lot of time, just brunch. Our entire dating history was primarily built around alcohol, dates around restaurants, going out and having fun in that way. That's kind of all we knew. And as things started to progress, I think the biggest thing is I remember Megan coming to me. Were we engaged when you first came to me?
Yeah.
We were.
Yeah. We were.
So
I remember being like, I can't get married if we don't work on this, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Our intimacy life was just, it ended up, we were roommates pretty much, or only having sex when we were drinking, you know? That was like, this doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was basically, I mean, that's all in the beginning, that's all when we were only together, when we were going out, having fun, drinking. And at times it wasn't a ton of alcohol, but it was just enough to take off the edge that anything that was really, that would mask any issues that were underlying that started to kind of, we had then later on in our relationship, we just completely removed alcohol. And once that happened, I brought everything else out. Yeah. So it really was, when you're trying to call off a wedding, I think that was the biggest thing. I remember when she first brought it to me, and that opened my eyes, and I was like, all right, something is seriously wrong, but we're so good. There's so much love and respect there.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say we're so good, because as we started to peel those layers off,
we thought we had great communication.
We thought we had good communication, thought things were great, but we really didn't, obviously. And then there was just so much love and respect, and that's never been gone. And even our first coach, Jill, she'd always come back to that.
Yeah, so she would say, like, you guys have, out of like almost all the couples I've worked with, I think you guys have a real shot because you care so much about each other. You have such respect. Like, we never were like,
there was never blaming,
throwing daggers or, you know, things like that. But it was just it was really sex and money, which I think are the biggest
common.
Exactly. And so being entrepreneurs, having separate businesses, that was another big cause, was just having this like competitive nature, and our finances were separate. Sure. And so I think sex and money really were the two things that drove us to need to separate, need to work on our relationship. But the justification, for sure.
Yeah, just calling off a wedding when you have that much love and respect, I think was, I didn't think, I mean, either of us were going to be able to do that. It was like, like, if you call off the wedding, then that's like you kind of setting your, like, that's a failure. Sure. Where you go from there, that's kind of ending it. Can we call off a wedding and then still get married? Like, is that something that's going to work? So we just got married, kind of continued to sweep things under the rug, and eventually it hit a head. And I was going to, I would have continued in the way we were going probably for another 5-10 years or so, being happy, just being stressed out. And both of us just kind of we were living very different lives. We're living, again, with love and respect, just separate lives.
Yeah. We had a really good friendship base. Mm-hmm. I think that was another like justification. And also we didn't have the best role models. And so a lot of people that we surrounded ourselves with, like the old ball and chain, like marriage is kind of sucks. That's like what we saw. And that was what was modeled. So I was like, all right, maybe this is just an early version of that. And I knew deep down that this isn't it. I know marriage can be amazing and fabulous. So yeah.
Yeah. No, and I was wondering that when you said that you thought you had good communication and it felt like everything was good. And I was curious if that was kind of like in comparison to, right? So like what we grew up having role modeled, or the chaos I grew up in, like, would never allow my son to grow up in that chaos, but certainly doesn't mean I gave him a perfect upbringing, right? So like when we compare it to something, we tend to think like, oh, I've got it figured out because it's better than.
Yeah, exactly. Better than that, for sure. We both come from, divorced families, and some good examples of how divorce can be, and some not, but it definitely just showed us like marriages don't last, they don't work. And that was just what we were surrounded by. So that's a good reason too, is it was better than a lot of people around us. And even our friends were shocked when a lot of my friends were like, oh my gosh, like they knew we were having issues, but they're like, you guys are just so good together, like in public. You would never expect it.
In
So.
public. Yeah. And I can completely relate to that. When I got divorced about 4 years ago, and my ex is still my best friend in the whole world. And that is what everyone had said to us, was like, what? You have all couples, like,
Yeah.
so mind blown by it. But yeah, same thing, that we, just because we were better than what we grew up with doesn't mean it was great, doesn't mean it was working for us. But I love that you guys are talking about that. There was this foundation of friendship, and there was this love and respect that for you guys led to you being able to figure it out. And for Richard and I, led to us being able to figure out a friendship. So learning, to figure out a new norm together, which is just so important. Yeah. So when you started to near the separation, Megan, were you mostly the one that was like, I'm not okay? Or were you both expressing like discontentment?
I was scared too. I don't think I ever would have gotten divorced. Like I said earlier, I would have just continued to live
or separated
unhappily for a while. Yeah, I mean, that was a lot of my life. I don't want to say it. I just kind of survived for just day by day. So I was pretty much okay with that. I didn't know any better.
You thought that was normal?
Yeah, I thought that was normal. When Megan came to me in like late 2019, and she had initially said, if I ask for a separation, I need you not to fight me on this. And when she told me that, it kind of, I knew right then that we needed to get a separation, but I never would have asked. So yeah.
So we were on the same page, I think, deep down. I was the one though that was like gonna ask for it. And we've talked to so many people about this, and the coaches that we've worked with too, and they say it tends, this is kind of generalizing, but it tends to be the woman in a heterosexual relationship that does make that like, okay, we need this. So I was the one that asked for it, and we were working with a coach that helped coach me through it. Was there when I asked for it and helped set terms and all of those things.
Yeah,
so,
Jill. And now we could not have done this without Jill. And
it was. I don't think we could have. I mean, maybe we could have figured it out by ourselves, but it definitely was important to have like a professional.
You don't. I think, and it's not at that moment, we may have been able to navigate a separation. We would have never gotten to the communication we were having and have the conversations that we were having with her or with anybody, with her specifically for us, going from being that open with somebody and being that vulnerable and having to say the hard things to other people. I don't know how it's possible without having somebody else there to mediate, to talk through your feelings and to help the other person understand. That's always how I feel when I talk to people about it.
Yeah. I think for me, the biggest thing that led to, okay, I need this separation, because that's a huge question we get, is like, how did you know it was time? It was a year of us in pretty intensive relationship coaching, like every single week, like you were having some extra sessions, like it was intensive. But what happened was, he had never been to therapy or done that kind of work. And so it was like Pandora's box. It opened up so much for Mike, and me too, of course, but I had been doing some of this work a little bit before and realized that a lot of stuff from childhood came up, and he had a whole path he wanted to go down. And so by the end of the year, while we made some headway, it was like it got harder before it got easier. And I was breathing down his back, and I was like, heal your trauma faster, like, come on. And it's so silly thinking back, but we realized, like, with my coach too, we were talking about it, being apart would help him really dive into that, would help me dive into my own stuff, that almost being together was like limiting. So that's really why I knew we needed time apart.
Yeah, that the distraction of being together, because then you're still, all the other nuances are there, and you're still focusing on the dynamic instead of on your own healing. And Mike, I'm curious with like those things that came up for you. I did a post just today. I put a story in last night about how, like, in order to heal your relationship, you have to address your trauma. So a lot of people will work with coaches, they'll go to therapy, but they're maybe doing talk therapy, or they're working on like life goals, but they're not digging into the root of what is creating the trigger, the root of why we're showing up the way that we are. And I think that's just so important. That becomes the complete relationship game changer when we dig in to our foundational stuff, really address it, heal it, and figure out how we want to show up differently. So I'm curious, Mike, for you, what were some of those things that you started to uncover?
Two of the biggest things was, I guess, I went through a pretty traumatic divorce as a child. I would always downplay it. I think you would agree. Like my parents, from the 25 years, my father just recently passed, but we went to court like against both of them to just kind of fight against. They never spoke. We were delivering envelopes like from one and another. They would. Looking back, I would always just downplay. I was like, oh, it wasn't that bad because we never, we're not poor. We're nothing. I wasn't begging for food. I had food. I had housing. I had everything. But emotionally speaking, I was lacking. It was lacking in probably every way. And that's why I said I was kind of just on my own. I wasn't on my own financially, but from 14, 15, I was pretty much on my own emotionally, if you want to say it that way. And I had mommy issues, a lot of mommy issues. Like, so that started to just unpack. And it's still to this day, I'm just still talking about things and things that come up and the relationship with my mom and how much better it's gotten, but still some things she'll say in a good way. And I'm just like, I can't believe my mom is saying this to me, and the love that I craved from her. And then I would try to put that on Megan, and she'd become my mom. And
that was so bad.
So it was a lot of that. And then and then the other probably big one was just how sex was modeled for me, how I learned about sex, which a lot of men is probably porn. That was mainly how I learned about sex, and obviously not the greatest education in the world.
Sure.
Those were two of the biggest things, really.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. And I think that a lot of men can relate to that. And it is so common. It's so common for a lot of people to minimize and dismiss those experiences and not grasp the impact that it still has present day. And when we talk about triggers, like, those sensory experiences are stored in the brain. Like, the body remembers what the brain tries so hard to forget. So we tend to lash out or withdraw or isolate whatever our survival behavior is. And a lot of times we have no idea where it's coming from, or we feel incredibly justified in it because we're like, well, they hurt me, so I'm going to hurt them back. So I appreciate, Mike, that your transparency with that. And you're laughing. Tell me what is coming to mind right now as you're thinking about that.
It's true. It's just, I mean, I would, because mine is isolation. Mine is disconnect, run away, and then it's just because looking back at who I was in 2019, and my self-awareness was just not there. And knowing my triggers, feeling the tension in my stomach, in my chest, what that means. It's all those different things that it just takes a lot of time to learn and understand and breathe through it and learn how to get out of it in your own way. And it takes a lot of,
I think just even asking for help, that's something like when he's sick, like I want to take care of him and he's not used to that. And so he'd almost like push me away. I'm like, wait, I want to help you. Whereas when I'm sick, I'm like, please take care of me. And it's been really incredible to see since we started that in 2019, how much both of us have individually changed, which, like you said, that's essential. Like, we would not be together today if we did not do that work on ourselves. But especially to just see how much he's changed in that way has been pretty cool.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things during our separation, the biggest takeaway for me was I always said, like, you have to do this work for yourself, and you do. And I thought initially I did, but when we separated, I could have stopped, but I was starting to finally see all these things come together, and all this work was culminating into the person that I really wanted to become. And it was just, I finally started to do it for myself. And if I felt that switch, like I was, it felt so different.
It started for me and it ended up, which it had to be for him, and it ended up being for him.
And that
it's starting for Megan is actually, I mean, in a lot of ways, that's a beautiful thing because it was the motivation you needed, right? So if it would have started, like, you probably would have never done it if it was originally for you. And so that motivation, there's nothing wrong with that, but that for it to then transition from that extrinsic motivation to the intrinsic of like, no, I want this healing because it's making my life feel better.
Yeah.
Such a powerful transition.
Yeah. It's huge. And I remember when we were separated,
she was still,
I was a little like, is he going to,
you were still starting
doing it?
The controlling was stopping, but it was still a little bit,
really hard.
It was good
me.
for her. It
was very good for me. Which so is twin parenting. It's like very the same. It's like, I have to let go. I got to go with the flow a little bit more. And I would check in with our relationship coach and she's like, I just want you to know he's doing the work. That's all I'm going to tell you. And I was like, okay, cause I'm like, I'm not there to be with him every week to see if he's doing it. And when we did reunite, which I don't want to jump ahead, but wherever you want to take it, like when we did reunite, it was like an immediate difference, like both of us. It was this energetic, like, whoa, something has really shifted in these 3 months that we were apart initially. So it was pretty wild.
Yeah. So let's talk about that during the time of separation.
Yeah.
Did you guys have ground rules put into place of like how often you're going to interact, what that was going to be about? Tell me about, how you worked through all that.
Yes. Oh.
You want to share?
Yeah.
We're still getting used to like doing this together. So we set ground rules again with our coach. She really helped guide us with that. So it was that we weren't going to talk the first 3 months or talk really intermittently because we wanted to be separated. We wanted to, not that it's like, let's see how life is without the person. That wasn't the intention. It was more so we need to just be on our own. We need to like really focus on ourselves and essentially like be single, but not to go, do I want to necessarily be with this person kind of thing. So that was one. Another ground rule we set was working on ourselves and making sure that was like priority, which is why he still saw her every single week. I jumped in, I think like once a month. And then also could we see other people? And we did set that with her and we were allowed to. And that was something that we did share on our Instagram and got a lot of hate for that. It was really interesting. It was like, oh my gosh, this isn't normal. This is like, or not, I should say normal. This isn't, I didn't expect it, but again, we worked with her and she's like, I think because of the background that you guys are coming from and because the intimacy has so not been there, I actually encourage this. And so those were our ground rules. And again, our rules with that was don't be stupid. Don't get pregnant.
Yeah.
Being smart. We do want to try to work on this together, but we really need to be apart and separated.
The clear intention was we were going to try to get back together. It's not like one person, like we've talked about. It's not one person's waiting to leave. One person's there. We're working to try to get back together. And we also, again, the only other thing is our communication was basically nothing because we had no kids, we had no dog, we had no house. We were able to leave. We were traveling. I was living in Vegas. She was in New York, Vegas, Florida. So we were just being nomads during that time. So our communication was allowed to be basically
If
nothing.
it was now with a dog and twins, it would be incredibly different, I'm sure.
Navigate that with children, dogs, homes, assets.
So we do always say that, like, we were lucky in that sense that we had very little to communicate about.
And thanks for making that distinction because that is important that when there are kids involved, when there's other factors, but you guys were in a position where you didn't have to. And I think that is so crucial to have the clarity and the lack of distraction, the lack of that, even sometimes that toxic cycle that just keeps pulling you back, even when you can say like, okay, I know logically this is not the best for me, but emotionally I'm so attached to this person. So going that kind of no contact for the couple months really allowed you guys a lot of clarity.
Yeah. Well, he's going to call me out. I knew you were going to call me out. Yes, it definitely did. I struggled so much more than I thought I would. I thought I'd be like, I'm free. Yay. We just needed the time apart. Right. I really struggled. Like the first, we both, we were actually bi-coastal. We own a home in Las Vegas and we were here in New York as well. And so we both ended up going to Las Vegas and we're staying separately, obviously. But when I knew he was close to me, it was so hard for me not to talk to him. And I was really struggling. I would say it was like 3 weeks after we separated where we both were there together. But not. Yeah. And I was texting him and I was like, I'm really struggling. And I called him and I was like, I just need to talk to you. And he was great and gracious. And he's like, but we can't do this. Like, we need to not talk. And he really it was a pivotal moment in our separation because it probably was the first time I started to find myself again. I completely lost who I was. I lost any confidence. I lost any masculinity inside of our marriage. Yeah. The first time I ever stood up for myself, our marriage, looking back. And then honestly, it was one of the first times in a long time Megan had come to me in a feminine way and been like, I need you. Yeah. And that didn't exist for probably a while. Yeah. It was, that was a big part of
that. I'll never forget that moment because I know exactly where I was. I'll never the MGN signature, like staying there. I was like just getting groceries or something. I'll never forget it because it was a very memorable moment in our separation.
Yeah. That is such an important thing that you're saying right now. When I work with couples in that way, especially in this dynamic, which a lot of what I'm picking up on is there's a bit of the anxious avoidant dance going on of, I'm sure you guys have done that attachment style work with your coach. And what tends to happen is then the anxious appears controlling, or is controlling in some cases, and the avoidant kind of just dodges everything and shuts down, and then they're looked at as like cold and aloof. But what I see so often in these dynamics is that because, and frequently if the male has some of those mommy issues, they allow their partner to become the boss. And there's a lot of submission to their partner. And that is a lot of times what I talk about is that when the male, and obviously we're talking hetero, can take almost their power back, and they can set boundaries and they can be assertive, while their partner might struggle with it at first because they're like, whoa, this is not our norm. It's actually can feel so safe, and it can feel like, I mean, that he was able to step into his masculine energy, and that feels safe for a lot of women. And so that's hard, but go ahead, Mike.
Those are the roles that we wanted to play for so long, that's inherently what we wanted. It just
our natural ways.
It went in that direction, and I just caved, and Megan became the boss, and I didn't know how to snap out of it. It was I honestly, it would have been impossible. I don't know how I would have snapped out of it if it wasn't for everything we had gone through. But
it's so true though. Like even thinking back to, we did a lot of feminine masculine work when we got back together, because we knew that was such a huge part. And being an entrepreneur, owning a business, I ended up being in my masculine a lot, which I didn't have to be, but it kind of was just what happened. And I would bring that into our relationship. And I think too, for me, because the marriage felt like it was failing, I was like, I'm going to dive into what is succeeding, which is the business. And I feel validated there, and I feel worthy, where I feel like a failure in this. And so I brought so much of that energy. And it's funny because when we reunited the first time, which was 3 months in, I'm a performer as well. And I was doing a musical down in Florida. And whenever I'm performing, I'm very much in my feminine. I'm singing, I'm acting, I'm playing, I'm moving my body so much. So the second I saw him, I just felt that like more strength and groundedness from him. And he felt this like playfulness. And it was just, talk about intimacy. It was the best sex we've ever had.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Like, oh my gosh, like what happened? This was underlying. We didn't drink at all. There was no alcohol.
We removed alcohol basically from our in 2019.
It was just like so exciting to see, oh my gosh, these dynamics were really, that's really what was what we were struggling with was those dynamics. So it was huge for us.
And when you guys how did you decide to, and when you're saying you got back together the first time, you got back together and then split again, or what?
We wanted,
kind of,
So there was
COVID was
obviously
COVID.
So this all started right. New York was shut down, and we're in Florida. Coming back, like this was all like happening So Megan was doing a show that we both were in Florida. I was playing poker. She was in Naples. I was in Tampa. The show was ending. She was like, it's a special show. It's a show her mom did it on Broadway. She was like, I really want you to see the show. I was like, I don't know if I'm ready to see you yet. Whatever. So I was like, all right, we can do this. Like, so that was going to be our first meeting again, reconnection. We were supposed to we were going to meet. I was going to see the show. We were going to go to Disney World for like 5 days. That was going to be our reuniting, and Disney World shut down. Everything shut down. So now we're stuck in Florida in a beautiful home, but we're stuck in Florida. The East Coast is starting to shut down, like as you go. So we're stuck in this house basically for a week, and we were initially going to start dating. Yeah, that was going to be our plan. We were going to reunite,
still live separately,
but start dating for a couple months.
Yeah,
obviously that changed. We lived separately, but kind of just started like, I don't want to say dating through the phone. We just started to kind of
texting and FaceTime and things like that. But because of COVID, it was either like, okay, we're either living together and like intensely quarantined together, or we're not. And we just weren't ready to go from separating to be quarantined together. I was living with my mom, who's older. He was living with his grandmother, who's older. Yeah. So we couldn't even like sneak in meetings. It was like, we had to be completely separate for those 3 months. So the plan was to date, but because of that, we ended up having another 3 months separated. So it was 6 months in total with a week in between together. And basically by the end of those 3 months, you know, like everyone, we thought it was going to be 2 weeks quarantine, and we're like, okay, this isn't going anywhere. So we need to do something. And we ended up kind of sight unseen getting an apartment and moving in together and just all right, let's dive in and let's get back together and see what happens.
Yeah. The initial plan was, so because again, we were trying to do it as smart as possible. We talked about it. We were speaking, finally got back together. I was planning to leave every, like, I think we were going to do like 2 weeks on, 1 week off. I was like, to jump right into this maybe seems harsh but sure enough, it worked out. I had booked an Airbnb in New Jersey for like a week, and then 2 weeks happens. Megan was like, "Don't leave."
Yeah, I was like, "Wait, I don't want you to leave."
I was like, "This is a good sign." But I'd already booked it. I was actually going to play poker tournaments and stuff, so I went to New Jersey, and that was it. Yeah. And we hadn't separated since. But we were starting to kind of wean back into it, and again, it was just we couldn't go out and date. It was April, May of 2020, so we couldn't. Nothing was open. We couldn't do anything. Yeah. So navigating that was another. It was a memorable experience.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, been separating during a pandemic, but
we just kind of wanted to just have normal communication again over phone. Some fun, playful conversations.
Yeah.
And was your coach involved in that, of assisting you guys even to like determine, are you guys ready? Like, how did you decide, like, we're ready to do this?
I think she actually was a huge part of, like, I think you guys still need a little bit more time apart. Like, a quarantine is a big deal. That's like, I know a lot of relationships that crumbled during COVID because of quarantine. So it's just so hard. So she definitely steered us in that direction too.
It seemed common. That I actually feel like we could have navigated without her. It seems like common sense to kind of jump back into it. She was there. No, we worked with her. I worked with her still in we moved to different coaches in 2021. But that was, we worked with her. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
No,
I heard crying.
We worked with her during that time. And then when we got back together, it was kind of half and half. It was like, I would come in for 2 sessions as a couple, and then he would still
my dad had gotten sick
2 by himself too. So lots of other life things started happening. But I think the biggest thing too that we get asked a lot is, oh, it sounds like everything was hunky-dory when you got back together. Everything was great. It wasn't. I mean, it was night and day for sure. Mm-hmm. Like, very hopeful, like, oh my gosh, I think we can do this. But it was probably about a year more that really took to go, okay, we're solid. Like, we're all in, like, this is going to be life. It was about a year of getting to know this new version of us and working on our communication and still working on our intimacy. Because even though we had that magical week in Florida, fortunately, I'm not performing all the time, and we're on vacation all the time.
You're not.
So going back to real life, we had to navigate the intimacy, and that was still the hardest part for us. But it was coming from a completely sober place and also just being so open and connective. It was like completely different perspective.
The trust. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. What did some of that work look like that you guys did after you got back together? And then was there ever like thoughts or threats of like, this isn't going to work? Or, what did, I guess that looked like twofold. So what was the work you were doing? And then was this other component of like, this isn't going to work?
So I was continuing therapy coaching with Jill. And then we did do you know John Wineland?
Mm-mm.
So he's how would you describe?
Well, what we did with him was a masculine feminine embodiment intensive. It was like a 3-day virtual retreat.
It was 12 hours a day for 3 days.
It was
oh my God.
Intense thing we've ever. I gazed for an hour and I was like, what is happening?
We did a 45-minute to an hour eye gazing. I don't think we've ever looked at each other's eyes for more than 10 seconds.
I don't think my ADHD could have lasted even like a fraction of that.
It was so uncomfortable, and he had never done any like personal growth workshop like that. So he was just like, what is happening? But that was a lot of feminine, masculine embodiment. Like, he was doing tons of meditation and a lot of grounding work. I was literally like dancing around, doing a lot of feminine work, and more to it than just that, but that was a huge part of it. So that was really big, the actual coaching. And then this is something that's been a little bit more, I guess, recent in the last few years, but we started to trickle it in, and it's very applicable, is a weekly marriage meeting where we get on the same page for everything. Finances, we had some different categories, but finances, what's coming up that week, financially, anything we want to discuss that didn't go as planned last week, because money was a big distrust with us that we had to stay on top of it. Food, appointments that week, but also intimacy. So for us, I think a really big thing that we started to do is schedule intimacy, which we were very, very resistant to that. You were really resistant.
I didn't. To that. We talked about this a lot, but I remember Jill bringing it up in early 2019, and I was like, that seems
You can't
so
schedule sex. That's
yeah,
crazy.
I'm like, how, if you're scheduling sex, that's it, like that's a deeper issue. Like you don't need to, that's crazy. How do you have to, like, you should be so turned on all the time, like how, whatever.
Passion filled constantly.
Obviously, fast forward a couple of years, I was like, this is the most amazing thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
You're like, and now I'll see you Thursday at 7:00.
Yeah.
That's
You try to schedule 2 and you have then one like longer session. It's just like they call our, we have sex and love coaches now, they call them. It's like 2 maintenance sex, 2 maintenance sessions, and then like 1 deeper connective session.
And just to like, no, we're not going to leave it to chance. And maybe intimacy that week is like us cuddling or us, massaging or something. It doesn't have to necessarily be sex, but it's something where we're not leaving it up to chance. And we just kept leaving it up to chance. And our businesses were always taking over and more priority. And we're like, no, that's not going to be it anymore. So also, that was huge for
my
us.
understanding around what sex was or intimacy was. It's like, it's penetrative sex every single time. Like that's all it is. And that's what you have to get to.
Yeah.
And learning again about all these other things.
We just each other basically for the first time ever sexually in those years, actually, which was amazing.
And I believe I am a huge proponent of scheduling, especially as you're describing for your busy lifestyles and you guys travel a lot and entrepreneurs. And it is so easy to put our partner on the back burner. Like it is the easiest thing to do because we believe they're always going to be there. So I'll get around to them when I get around to them. And as you're describing with the weekly meeting and then also scheduling the intimacy, both things that I am constantly talking with my clients about, I call them weekly check-ins, but essentially the same concept of having intentional conversation that we tend to feel too tired or feel, we just don't make time for it. Yeah. And then the intimacy piece as well, when I'm doing intimacy coaching, that's exactly what we talk about. When it's on the calendar, you're prepared. Everyone is shaved and groomed and cleaned and ready to go and all the things that, that tends to be a common reason that it's like, no, not tonight, because a lot of those things you're not prepared. And I think it goes a long way to just be like, I know it's coming up. You can, start the foreplay that morning and it really sets the tone.
Exactly. And I think that's what we both realized was you get to look forward to it and anticipate it. And exactly, like prepare yourself. Don't have a meal that's going to make you feel crappy or lethargic, And the thing I think we've navigated pretty well is like, as we kind of alluded to before, I'm very much the organized and like to control. And he's very like, go with the flow, sometimes last minute kind of thing where I'm like, let's prep ahead. I started to be a little bit more go with the flow with it. And he started to be more scheduled. So we kind of started doing that, actually balanced us out a lot, which
we both were probably too polar in the other direction. So we needed to come back.
There were times, especially when his dad was really sick, where we would have something scheduled and it would just be, he'd be in a really bad grief day. And it's like, but at 7:00, we have to do this. It's like, we can have a day and we can let it go. It's okay. And so that's been something that we've just talked through, and really kept the communication open about.
It took years to rebuild the trust. And then once the trust was rebuilt around everything, that's when the communication really started to get better.
Yeah.
And then we felt like we could say everything. When you start talking about these intimacies sexually, like it took a long time to be able to listen to the other person when it's such a vulnerable thing to say, to correct me doing something or do that. And it took a while.
Couple other really quick applicable things
please.
We've done is, and this is something we did learn, everything we're sharing, we learned from coaches. So we're not relationship coaches. We just have gone through it. And it's the, like, when you want to tell someone like, hey, instead of complaining and saying, you always do this or whatever, it's like, when you do this, it makes me feel, explaining it more from that. And that was like a script that I literally have written on my phone so that if I want to be like, why did you do this? Like even literally just before we had something very minor, but I was just like, when this happened, like it makes me feel this way, And so it doesn't put the blame on the other person. It's like, hey, this is how I feel. And so that was huge. Instead of saying like, you never take the trash out, which is a silly thing to say, but let's say it's that, right? Like you never take the trash out. It pisses me off. Like, why don't you be a man of your word? Being like, when you don't do that, it makes me feel like you're not listening to me and it just doesn't make me feel prioritized or whatever. Right.
Yeah. One of the biggest, it would be if it's monetary, like if when you do this, it doesn't make me feel like we'll never hit our goals it's our goals. So it's not just like you're doing this and it's making me feel sad and angry. And then the other thing to do is which I think is great. I always use this one a lot. Is the story? It's when you're coming. It's like I built up the story in my head is. It's like you've built up this event, and now it's how you're viewing the event that happened. It's like the story in my head is X, and then so you can see it. The other person gets to see it from your perspective, and then they can kind of say the same.
That's been really huge, because otherwise it was just like a laundry list of you did this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, and it's like we're kind of keeping a checklist, you know, and a competition. That's been really huge. And then something that it's little, but we both started doing this. I started writing him notes every morning a couple of years ago in 2021. Just little notes on the kitchen counter, and just, it could be the simplest, like, I love you. Thank you so much for whatever yesterday that you did for me, and just acknowledging something that he's done, or how he made me feel, or how I think about him. The tiniest thing, it could be a novel, like every day is a little different. And then he'll text me either the night before or the morning of. And it's so simple and takes literally no time to do those things. And I can feel, because the last few weeks we haven't done it, because twin life has totally turned everything upside down. And literally the other day I had a little mini meltdown, and I was like, I don't feel connected to you. We haven't had our meeting, and we haven't done our text. And so I was like, okay, we need to get the meeting on the calendar, no matter what, doesn't matter. And we started the text and the notes again. And it makes such a difference. And it just makes the person like, you thought of me enough to write this little really thoughtful note that took 2 minutes. So that's been huge.
Yeah, the daily intentional efforts, even like the most simplest things, send such a clear message that you matter, that I'm thinking of you, that you're important, that you're worth the effort. And that is just compounds into the emotional intimacy that you're describing, which then leads to mind-blowing sexual intimacy. Like, it is all so interconnected. But I love what you guys have said, that it's really about that you both chose to do the work. And I think that's like the biggest takeaway to me here, is that it was an intentional decision on each of your guys' end, and you both dug in and dealt with trauma and your own shit, and you were willing to own your own shit in the process. And that is why everything that you've done has been so effective.
Yeah, for sure. It's so wild, because like, I think I said before, I had a really good friend who was also married and going through not the same exact thing, but just a lot of struggles in her relationship, and her husband wouldn't work on it, would not go to therapy, and they got divorced. And basically near the end, he was like, okay, I want to try now. And she's like, I'm checked out. Like, it's been too long. I can't, you know? And it didn't end in a beautiful friendship. Like you have, you know, it ended in not good terms at all. And so I realized, wow, we're both so lucky, because we both did the work. We both showed up, and I felt really, really grateful for him, because he didn't bat an eye. He was just like, yes, whatever we need to do, let's dive in. And I think that is like why I personally held on as long as I did. I had a lot of friends say, I can't believe you guys are still working at it many years later, when things were still really hard. And I said, there's something like this glimmer of hope that we are making tiny, small progress, but we're both in it together. And we just became more of a team rather than separate entities. Yeah. So.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, you will be probably working on it forever, because we are human and imperfect. And as long as you both are invested, that's what matters the most.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Tell everyone where they can find you on social media, website, everything like that.
Yeah. So we are Meg and Mike Do Marriage on TikTok and on Instagram. That's really where we hang out. And then also our podcast. So it's literally MEG and Mike Do Marriage, anywhere, TikTok, Instagram, and podcast. That's where we hang out most.
Well, perfect. Thank you guys again so much for being here. This was such a good conversation, and I just love the relatability, and I really appreciate and respect the effort that you guys have both put into making it work. So thank you for coming to share that.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks again for joining me, Mike and Megan. And thank you all for hanging out on Relatable Relationships Unfiltered. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, sign up for my newsletter, and find me on Instagram at Dr. Elizabeth Fedrick. This is Relatable Relationships Unfiltered.